Oh, how do I do this, Randy? He really needs no introduction. He's been a real mentor of mine, somebody to look up towards. I mean, he is taller than I am, so that's easy. But he's also like a North Star, I would say. He's a very consistent figure in conservation. He does not waver. He is a person of his word. And when he says, you know, out of my cold dead hands, I, by God, believe he means it, okay? And right about when my eyes were being opened to conservation, the value of public lands, the asinine notion that people wanted to, fancy word, divest ourselves of our public lands and privatize those lands, Randy Newberg was there saying, you're going to have to pry those lands out of my cold dead hands. So please, warm welcome for Randy Newberg.
Well, I've got like 8 different stories I was going to tell tonight. Most of them revolve around this little problem. You know, we did a podcast where we tried to tell everybody that I was in Portland doing this thing, and I got some pizza on the way back to the hotel, and I got food poisoning, and I vomiting, pass out, go through this shower door. And people actually believe that. Those of you who've seen the picture, you know that I got bit by a shark in Mexico. So now I gotta come clean. Really, I did get food poisoning in Portland. Pepperoni pizza of all things. And if you're gonna go to a Portland ER, don't go there on a cold Friday night at 1 in the morning. It's about as crowded as this is. But I was in Bend, Oregon last week doing seminars, and no one believed my story. So if a lot of you have shown the picture, and I have this big shark bite looking scar on my forearm. So I put that up as the first slide in my PowerPoint. And I'm like, all right, how many wanna know the true story about what happened to me? And everyone's like, yeah. I said, well, I got bit by a shark in Mexico. Well, I knew that was bullshit about that food poisoning thing. So I had to spend the last half of my seminar trying to convince them that I really did not get bit by a shark in Mexico. Which goes to prove to you, truth is stranger than fiction. The other story I was gonna tell was, I grew up in a little town, Big Falls, Minnesota, where everybody was a hunter. And I had too much time on my hands, and I had a lot of public land there, and my whole family was hunters, from my grandparents to my uncles to everything. So, you know when you get like 13, and you kind of learn the birds and the bees? And my mom wasn't yet 30. I'm like, Mom, was I planned? Like, we don't need to talk about that right now, Randy. Because it was weird to me that my uncles, her youngest brothers, were the same age as me. Everybody else I went to school with, their uncles were old. So, anyhow, we had too much time on our hands, and we contemplated blowing up the train bridge. Any of you, so if you don't think young kids are influenced by what they see on TV, any of you see the good, the bad, and the ugly in 1970? Right? They blow up the train bridge. And everyone in their little town was at the coffee shop saying, did you see that Clint Eastwood movie? Man, they blew up the train bridge. And then along comes Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in like 73, 74. And they can't get the safe open in the boxcar, so what do? They blow up the boxcar. So me and my uncles, we tried to blow up the train bridge by hijacking all of Grandpa's shotgun shells, cutting them in half, pouring gunpowder in a paint can, and walking down Main Street with 2 pounds of gunpowder and a big long starter rope as our wick. But I looked around and I saw some younger people in the audience. I'm like, man, I can't tell a story like that. I'll have parents emailing me, calling me, saying, what are you doing teaching my kids that kind of stuff? The other story I was going to tell was how you really find out who your friends are based on where you killed an elk. Right? Sometimes you can't even bribe people. Marcus and I are in Colorado. Have you ever been to Gateway, Colorado, anybody? It's like, there we go, yeah. It's like cliffs. And we walk up to the edge of the cliff, and there's a bunch of elk down there. And in a moment of weakness, there's a nice 7x7. Marcus says, shoot him. I'm on him. Yeah, camera guys are always, I'm on him. And I'm like, but Marcus, we only have like a half-hour daylight, and he's way down there. And we're far from the truck. And anyhow, that night, as we spent the rest of the darkness trying to quarter up that elk, we pack out the first load. The next morning, some guys came by our trailhead. They're driving an old Jeep. Some guys, I mean, I'm kind of old, but these guys are older than me. And they pull up, and they see that we got 2 hindquarters hanging in our camp, and they're like, where'd you shoot them? And I dig out my digital map. I'm like, well, you know this trail here, da-da-da, down there, and shoot. And they're like, ooh, boy, man. They didn't really have much to say. They're like, well, I hope he was big. But, you know, when you get to a certain age, you're really not that aware of your surroundings. So they back out, and they got this, they're driving a CJ Jeep. I think everyone in Colorado since Mork and Mindy in 1978 has a red CJ Jeep, right? That's what these guys had. And they're driving away, and they think everybody is as hard of hearing as they are. And I hear the one guy say, those dumbasses are in for one hell of a day. And I already knew that at that time. So now I'm looking at all these young BHA folks, and we come up with another load. And we're standing there, we're kind of refueling, and we're thinking now, should we try get the last load out tonight, or should we get it out in the morning? And here comes a truckload of guys maybe in their 20s, 25 or so. And I'm looking at how much cash I got in my pocket. And they walk over to this lip where the trail drops down. And I'm like, hey fellas, how you doing? And they're like, Randy Newberg, what are you doing here? I said, well, I'm trying to kill myself, and I'm hoping you guys can stop that from happening. And they're like, well, what's the problem? I said, well, I got an elk down there, and I'm really paying for it. And I'd pay each of you $200 if you'd come down there and split those loads up with me and Marcus. And the real stout one of the group, he's like, well, where are they at? I said, well, you got to go around the corner of this trail, and you'll see down there. He runs down there, and he comes back. He's all excited. I'm like, better get my money out. He's like, you don't have enough lover money to get me to do that. They jump in their rig, and off they go. Damn. So I was going to tell that story, but that story takes too long. I had a few others that I was going to tell. Hank Shaw said that he was going to get up here and tell a story about me and him down in Arizona, but I told him no way, because Hank lies a lot. And my marriage, I've been married for 34 years. And any of you who come to my seminars, right, I give a lot of marriage advice. And here's why. If you hunt 100 days a year, and you've been married for 34 years to the same woman, you got something figured out. I mean, I don't want to put the marriage counselors out of business, but you ever had your marriage counselor get divorced? You'd want your money back. In Bozeman, there was a couple that were marriage counselors, and they got divorced. I told all my CPA clients, if I was you, I'd go get my money back. You should listen to me. My marriage advice is free. So I was gonna get into marriage and stuff like that, but I'm too close to Bozeman, so my wife might hear some of it. You know, when I'm on the road somewhere, you know, I'm in Austin, Texas, I tell all kinds of stories about my marriage. And when I start getting back to Montana, I gotta kind of shrink it in a little bit because my wife finds out stuff. Hey, all right, guys, does your wife or girlfriend have a way of finding out things that you're like, how the hell did she find, where would she hear that from? Yeah, all the guys are looking, anyone who's got their wife here is like, yeah, I was gonna raise my hand, but I don't want to get in trouble. Just remember, there's 2 basic rules to a long marriage. I worked in a sawmill when I was going to college. My senior year of college, I decided, well, I can't afford a wedding, so honey, how about we just get married on Saturday? She's like, well, we can't do that. Your family can't get here from Minnesota. My family can't get here from Pennsylvania. That's the point. Saturday morning, $20 and a blood test, we were married. And they don't do the blood test thing anymore, do they? I don't know why they did it, but I must have passed. It's one of the few things I passed. But anyhow, this old boy I worked with in the sawmill, Don Bowman, he comes, I worked graveyard shift in the boiler room, and he was the millwright. And he's, at the time, 60-ish, and he'd come every morning for about a half hour and drink coffee, and we'd, you know, talk hunting stories. He loved to hunt as much as I did. And he looks at me and said, Randy, heard you're getting married this weekend. Yep, I am, Don. He said, I got some advice for you. I'm like, really? And Don had been married a long time to Doris. I mean, they're a happy couple, so I thought I better, you know, quit talking and start listening. And he says, I've worked with you for almost 3 years now, and I've met that Kim girl 4 times. You don't bring anything to the table that she can't replace by noon tomorrow. Behave yourself. So, I've kind of lived my life that way. I know where the real talent in the family exists. And then, in my CPA life, I realized real quickly that when you're a tax accountant, you're more of a counselor than you are an accountant. It's all about setting expectations and patching up, you know. You really get to find out what couples argue about when they close the door when they come into your CPA office. It's like, click, and the tension in the room just changes. And I'm like, you know, I'm not very good at this. I grew up in a logging family. How in the hell am I gonna be a marriage counselor and a tax accountant at the same time? So I started going to these human relationship classes. I'm like, all right, you guys go study the tax code. I'm gonna be here because I want clients to stay in my office and be clients forever. So I gotta understand how they think and how husband-wife things work, and maybe it'll help me at home. So this is my 3rd year of marriage. I go to this class in Chicago about the dynamics of marriages. And the instructor's a guy. And in the CPA world at that time, it was more men than women. And he says, all right, any of you guys ever argue with your wife? And since none of our wives were there, you know, we're like, yeah, sure, yeah, we do. He's like, you ever win? A couple guys lied and said, yeah, I win. He said, well, today's lesson is about, do you want to fight or do you want to win? And I don't mean win the fight. I'm like, what's he talking about? So he said, and this study is a little dated, but I think it's probably even more correct today. He said, you guys, the survey says, right, isn't there like a game show, survey says? The survey says that you are wrong 2 out of 3 times. The wife is right 2 out of 3 times. So you got twice as good a chance of being wrong as being right. And do you think the one time you're right that she's gonna admit it? Nope. That's why I don't get to hunt as much as I'd like to. So, from that, I developed this saying, peace, not justice. Peace, not justice. You don't have to be right. So this is mostly because the BHA audience is a younger audience, and a lot of you will come up to me and ask me like, well, how did I get your job, man? You hunt 100 days a year, and I don't think I'd be married that long, da-da-da. So I decided not to tell a real strong marriage story. So you're probably thinking like, well, what the hell story is he gonna tell? He just likes to get up there and talk and listen to himself, I guess. But we've had some great storytellers tonight. And they've all had great lessons. And I think if there's one thing about getting old, and I consider myself old now, I'm not allowed to be left alone in a hotel room by myself. So that officially makes me old. But you get a chance to reflect on life. You get a chance to kind of prioritize what's important. And there was an old guy I hunted with, and he passed away a couple of years ago, and he said, Randy, you have this missionary zeal about public lands. Where does that come from? And at the time, I don't know that I really had the good answer for him. I just kind of kept driving down the road and changed the subject and stuff. And so I got to thinking about that. Like, where does this come from? Well, it comes from growing up in a little logging town of 500 people called Big Falls, Minnesota. It's a place that you would never go to unless somewhere between Bemidji and International Falls you had to pee. That's the only reason you do it. The Big Fork River comes right through town. That's where we get the name Big Falls. But I told you that I grew up in a family where everybody hunted. From when my great-grandfather came from Finland, settled in northern Minnesota. On my mom's side, everybody hunted. I was going to be a hunter. My life was, this is what I am going to do when I grow up. I'm going to hunt. And in Minnesota, hunting age was 12 years old. Well, my dad had inherited a drinking problem from his family had drinking problems. And so at age 10, my parents divorced. And my dad moved to Montana, of all places. And at that time, my dreams of becoming a hunter, right on the cusp of when I'm going to become 12 years old and I get to hunt, kind of go out the window. And, you know, in 1974, it was kind of a stigma for your parents to be divorced. And kids being kids, you know, it wasn't a fun time for me. And so I ended up going through Hunter Ed. And there's two people, and you can probably think of who the Paul Reese and the Owen Gordon are in your life. But I had a 6th grade teacher, Paul Reese, and the little hardware store owner, Owen Gordon. They taught hunter education. And they knew how much hunting meant to me. I would come in Owen's store, and I would look at shotgun ammo. You know, he only had like 4 firearms for sale in that little hardware store, but I'd just sit there and look at them. And Paul Reese knew how much I loved to hunt because when it was English class, every story I ever turned in, and he was my 5th and 6th grade teacher, had to do with hunting. And so they both made sure I got to go through hunter education. And my mom, when my parents divorced, my mom took a job in a little diner, which is not a real profitable endeavor. And like I said, you know, she's only 16 years older than me, so thank God I'm the oldest. Right? I have a younger sister and a younger brother. And it was a really hard time for my mom. And the way I got to hunt, and as I thought about this, is I'd get home from school. We lived in a little trailer house down, I don't know, about 3 blocks from the Big Fork River. And there was a trail that our trailer house, I could just walk 100 yards, I'd get on this trail and it'd take me down the river. I'd jump in the trolley car, don't run your finger over with the trolley car, that hurts. I'd go to the other side of the Big Fork River, and there was all public land. And that's what I did. The world did not make any sense to me. My life pretty much seemed like it was falling apart. And when I wanted some sanity, when I wanted the world to make sense, me and my 20 gauge would walk down the trail, cross the river, and I'd go shoot grouse, I'd go shoot rabbits, I'd do whatever. And if I came home with 2 rough grouse, my mom made the biggest production. You would have swore that I just brought home, a basket full of money or something. So that was my life through high school. Went off to college and did all those things. And then you get a little older and you start realizing how some of these things connect themselves in ways that you don't really know. And I moved to Montana, and there's this symposium going on, Montana State University, first North American Hunter Symposium. Some guy who I'd heard about, who I'd seen a picture of him, I thought it was the Pope. I did not know the Pope hunted, but then I found out his name was Jim Poswitz. And so I go to that, it's a room filled like this at Montana State University, and so here I am, I'm like 27 years old, sitting in the back and too nervous to even go talk to him. And after the whole thing, I talked to him, I'm like, look, I'm just an accountant, but if ever I can help your thing you're doing here, here's my card. And he was always smiling, always happy. You bet, I'll be calling you. He called me. Man, this guy must be hard up. Little did I know, I did not know he was one of the conservation legends of our time. Until 1993, I think it was the next year, our Montana legislature's in session. And Jim and a couple other people called me and said, you might want to come up here and just give your thoughts and see what goes on. And so this is tax season. I tell my boss, I'm going to take a day off. I'm going to Helena. And he gave me this look like, well, you might have the rest of the year off, pal. It's tax season. So this is another thing that struck me about who we know, who we meet, how sometimes it's just accident, sometimes it's divine intervention, good luck, whatever. The topic of the day is whether or not we should be able to hunt state trust lands. Some of you are too young to even know that prior to 1993, we could not hunt state trust lands. And so I show up there. I've never been to a legislative session in my life, but I got talked into it by these old codgers. They're like my age at this time. And I go there and they see me and they're like, well, did you sign in? Yeah. And I'm like so nervous. I'm thinking, I'm the first guy who's going to pee his pants in a legislative session. But I sat in the back, and in our environment of today, this really strikes me and stuck with me. I watched Jim get up there. I watched Tony get up there. I saw John get up there. I saw the old guard of conservation in Montana get up there. And they fought, and they came up with ideas, and they didn't give up. And not once did any of them say, I'm doing this for myself. They didn't care that the trailhead might have an extra vehicle. They didn't care that the person who might go and hunt and share those public lands, share these new state lands that now for what, $10, we get a recreation stamp that we get to hunt 5.4 million acres. That happened because guys like Jim and Tony and Jack, they were worried about who was coming after them. Who was going to follow behind them? Who were they leading the way for? And it struck me how they had this ethos for that next generation. And how they volunteered. And how they gave so much of their time and their talent and what treasure they might have had. And I know today, we have a lot of people who will say, we don't need new hunters. We got too many hunters. Those people don't look like me. They don't talk like me. We don't need them. It's already too crowded. Well, I can think to myself, what if Paul Reese would have said, you know, Randy Newberg doesn't need to be a hunter? What if Owen Gordon would have said, you know what, Randy Newberg doesn't need to be a hunter? What if Jim Posowitz and Tony and Jack and all them had said, well, you know, there's nothing in this for me. What the hell, why would I take a day off work? Why do I care? Why should I do this? And I feel that if you have platforms that I've been blessed to have, it's your job to stand up and say, you know what? There are other people out here. There are Randy Newberg, the 12-year-old Randy Newberg is somewhere out here. The Jim Posowitz, who led by example. You at BHA epitomize that ethos, that idea, and that concept. Nobody I know at BHA is saying, well, I don't want to fight the tough fight. I don't want to fight for public lands because someone else might get to use them. Well, there might be an extra rig at the trailhead. Oh, someone might float down the river when I'm trying to cast this line. And that's why I love this organization. That's why I love these people. Because you are the kind of people who are going to make a difference. You are the ones who are going to make sure the public land is here 100 years from now. If you look around this room, just look to the person to your left, person to your right, look at the people behind you up in the balcony. What you just looked at are some of the most committed people who are going to determine the future of public lands, hunting and fishing in America. There's no one coming through that door to come and rescue us. There's no one coming here to say, well, I'm going to do this. I'll take care of this for you. I know you're busy today. No. If I've learned one thing, conservation is never easy. It's always going to be difficult. All the things we love, all the things we enjoy are here because someone else said, yeah, it's difficult, but it's important for the people who will come after me. It's always uncomfortable because someone's going to be mad at you, right? Might be your brother. Just saying. Who calls you up and says, Randy, I think that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. I'm like, well, I'm older than you, so shut up. My point is, it might be a coworker, it might be a family member, it might be somebody, but someone is going to try and make your life uncomfortable for advocating for the things that you love, the things that you know are critical for the future of the things that we are here to celebrate. And it's always inconvenient. We don't get to put it on our calendar that today this legislator is going to try and mess this up. The opportunities that come in front of us come as a flash, and if we aren't ready, or if we say, well, I can't do that until next summer, those opportunities are gone. And so if there is one thing that drives this missionary zeal for me about all these things, it's the fact that somewhere along the way, somebody said we need to have public lands so that some young kid whose parents were divorced has a place to hunt. Somebody said, you know what? We need this idea of mentors. The Paul Reeses and the Owen Gordon said, hey, I'm going to volunteer for hunter education. I'm going to take some of these kids out if I have to. That is what has built what we have. And it's organizations like BHA that are going to make the difference. By your presence here, every one of you, when you volunteer, when you come to events like this, if you can't make it but you send money, you are the ones who are going to make sure that someday down the road, there will always be public places for the public people to hunt and to fish. And for that, I thank you all.